I'm City Councilor Lydia Edwards. I'm Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Tuesday, July 13th, 2021, and we're here today for a virtual hearing on Docket 0481. The docket is an ordinance amending the City of Boston Code, Section 5-5.20, paid parental leave for City of Boston employees. It's referred to the committee on March 31st, 2021, and it was co-sponsored by by Councilor Michelle Wu, Councilor Nisa Sabi-George, and myself. In accordance with the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, I'm modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that's openly accessible. We are having this hearing on Zoom. This enables us to do our business at the same time, meet the responsibilities and the safety requirements of today. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov/city-council-tv and live on Xfinity 8/RCN82/Verizon 964. The hearing is being recorded and will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. Docket 0481 amends the current ordinance by applying the parental leave benefit to parents that have experienced a loss of pregnancy. Passage of this ordinance would provide a parental leave benefit to city employees, parents, in the event of a natural birth by any method, adoption, surrogacy, and loss of pregnancy. Docket 0481 would also extend the parental leave to 12 weeks from 6 weeks. Joining the committee today on behalf of the administration and on behalf of the administration, we have Tammy Puce, Senior Advisor for Human Resources, and Joanne Wisniewski. My apologies, Joanne, if I mispronounced it.
No, you're fine. Thank you.
Was I close? Wisniewski?
Yes, perfect.
The Human Resources Transformation Director. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to my co-sponsors for opening remarks. And then other counselors who have also joined us and are here today are Councilor Ed Flynn, Councilor Julia Mejia, and and then of course the co-sponsors, Councilor Wu and Councilor Asabi George. So Councilor Wu.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone. I am eager to see this next iteration of the ordinance. It was a big, very exciting day when we passed the ordinance several years ago, not just because it was something that was a landmark piece of legislation across the country, but by that time I had been entrusted knowing the due dates of every city employee or their partner who were waiting for this to pass back in the day. And so it was great to be able to deliver that across the board then. And it has had an impact. And so I'm looking forward to hearing an update on what this has meant for families and who are working for the city of Boston, as well as making sure that we are following through and taking care of every situation in which our city workers need to have time and to have healing and to have that space and support in dealing with pregnancy, loss of pregnancy, and all that comes with balancing being a working parent. I apologize that I will not be able to stay on for the entirety of this hearing, but my team is watching closely. We've submitted questions ahead of time, and I will make sure that I review the tape as well. But thank you so much, Madam Chair, and to our co-sponsor, Councilor Asabi George, for making sure we're moving forward with this.
Thank you. Councilor Asabi George.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to you and Councilor Wu for your partnership in this effort. As a parent of 4 children, when we think about the support that any employer should be giving and helping with as families transition with a new child at home, it's really important that we are supportive. I'm particularly excited about the opportunity to support parents who have had a pregnancy loss. As someone who has had multiple pregnancy losses, this is for sure a needed additional benefit, both to, just represent a supportive employer, but realize the very sort of physical and emotional impact that pregnancy loss has on our families. I'm hearing some sort of feedback, so I will leave my remarks at that and will continue to be a part of today's hearing. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Counselor, I think it was actually Counselor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and I want to say thank you to Councilor Edwards, Wu, Asabi, George for sponsoring this ordinance. Having a strong and comprehensive paid parental leave policy is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the equitable thing to do. Parents, especially new mothers, sometimes have to drop out of the workforce to care for their newborns because of lack of paid parental leave. And research has also found that paid parental leave can help women stay in the workforce in the long term as well, so that they are not losing financial stability while caring for their children and won't feel discouraged from returning to the workforce. I support this extension of our paid parental leave benefits. I look forward to hearing more details about this ordinance. And again, want to say thank you to my colleagues on the Boston City Council for this important update. And also want to thank the city administration officials that are here that are also dedicated to making sure that working families are treated fairly and treated with respect and dignity. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. And Counselor Mejia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to participate, and obviously I'm in full support already. So just here to engage in the dialogue and lend my voice and questions when deemed appropriate. Thank you. And to the sponsors for bringing this forward.
Thank you. So I'm going to just go ahead, before we turn it over to the administration, I'm going to do a quick summary of what this would do and also read a statement into the record from NARAL Pro-Choice. So this is essentially trying to update a paid parental leave policy, which already had, I believe, stillbirth as one of the options for parental leave. Stillbirth is the loss of pregnancy, I think, after 20 weeks. But many people know you can lose a pregnancy before that time, and it can be traumatic. And also there are times where you will terminate a pregnancy, and that may be or may not be a reason why you need to take some time. I don't know that that's really any of our business to determine whether it's a stillbirth or miscarriage or for whatever reason you lost your pregnancy. And that's why we use the term loss of pregnancy. I do think if we're going to be leaders and discuss, and already we were leaders by having stillbirth even mentioned in our policy, I think we need to continue to move and evolve as society is moving and evolving to include all sorts of people and experiences to ensure that we treat them with compassion and dignity. That's why we have parental leave, not just maternal leave. And that's why men could also have access to this as well. As you recall, Matt O'Malley's testimony, when we introduced this, was some of the most powerful testimony about the emotional impact on him as a father when they lost their pregnancy. And I just still to this day, I'm so incredibly grateful for his vulnerability. So it would, we put in the 12 weeks, which I believe this administration was moving forward anyway, or towards anyway. So I don't think that's inconsistent. And then put in the terms loss of pregnancy in several components where there are, where there's reasons for after adoption, we put in loss of pregnancy, just to make sure it's part of the options. This is, again, the ordinance. The regulations would still be within the confines and the control of HR, which I believe does most of the regulations and does most of the explanations for how the terms are explained in a separate document. We don't need to do that for them. They can do their jobs. That being said, I wanted to make sure that everyone understood the background. We're not alone in this, obviously. As I said, we were already leaders, but New Zealand's parliament approved legislation that gave leave for miscarriage or stillbirth without needing to use sick leave. In India, under the Maternity Benefit Act, a woman is entitled to paid leave for 6 weeks immediately after a miscarriage. Nicaragua and Panama also provide paid leave in accordance to the woman's needs in the case of a miscarriage, stillbirth, or complications arising from childbirth. So this is, I think, we're headed in the right direction together. Very quickly, a statement from NARAL Pro-Choice of Massachusetts. For many families and pregnant people, pregnancy loss can bring unimaginable pain and grief. Supporting people coping with pregnancy loss by allowing them to take the time they need to grieve and heal is critically important. Reproductive freedom is the ability to decide if, when, and how to have a family. And for those who experience pregnancy loss, it is the ability to mourn and care for themselves and their family. We applaud Councillor Edwards, Councillor Wu, Councillor Sabi George for embracing the full spectrum of reproductive freedom and creating a policy that will ensure greater equity for women and pregnant people. Rebecca Hartfolder, Executive Director of NARAL Pro-Choice Massachusetts. So I'm going to turn it now over to the administration and for remarks. And so I'll turn it over collectively. I'm not sure who is scheduled to speak.
So thank you, councilors. Joanne Wisniewski here. And I just want to say that the administration welcomes the opportunity to talk about this very critical issue. And we certainly support working families. And we want to make sure that it's an equitable opportunity for everybody. I think what might help is if we go through just a high level, and I'm going to ask Tammy to do that, of the changes that we did make to the paid parental leave back in March, just so that we're all consistent with the policy that we're currently administering, which is, I believe, some of the changes you're looking for in the ordinance. So I think just to level set, that would make sense first. So I'm going to ask Tammy to do that.
Councilors, would you find that helpful?
Sure. And before you go, Tammy, I wanted to note that Councillor Matt O'Malley has joined us. And since I brought him up, if it's okay, we'll have him do a quick, brief opening remark. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be mercifully brief. Just appreciate the leadership here shown by you and other colleagues. This is very, very important to me, and look forward to getting this done in short order. So appreciate your leadership, and looking forward to support this in every way I can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you all for having us. We're happy to be here. As you know, the City of Boston has had an ordinance about paid parental leave for some period of time, but the administration certainly agrees with you that there were lots of things that could be done, and we've tried to do some of them to try and strengthen that policy, and did this back in March. So we have clarified that, of course, this policy would apply to any kind of parent, including our policy is specifically involves foster care placement as well. There was always some concern in the city at some point about whether or not if two parents were raising children together, whether they needed to split that time. We've made very clear that, of course, each one of our employees has the right to this benefit. So that's an improvement. We've also made sure that we're really clear about what an event is that's covered, and we're happy to hear and work with you more on the language with regard to pregnancy loss. Certainly, I want to say on behalf of the administration that we certainly support everything that's been said so far in terms of how important that recognition of that is to families, both for when pregnancies work out the way people want and when they don't. We have some operational issues that we're happy to talk with you about on that topic as we go forward. Probably don't need to do that now. We can deal with the authors later on specifics if that's necessary. But generally speaking, we've made really clear in the policy that it went from 6 weeks to 12 weeks, because certainly in this day and age, we need to make sure that we're walking the walk about how important it is to have bonding that happens right away with placement of children and or births of children or bringing a child into a family. And so we want to make sure that we're giving our people as much time as we possibly can to do that. Other than that, there's really not that many distinctions between our policy and the one that the council is considering right now, other than the term pregnancy loss. And again, we're happy to continue to work with you on that language to make that workable.
Thank you very much. So just, I guess we can start to go through some very brief questions. If I understand then, the regulations as the term loss of pregnancy and that inclusion kind of comprehensively, you would write later on, right? You support its inclusion and then regulation. Yes, right?
We do. And again, I don't want to bog down the conversation of support with logistics. But as an operational piece of the administration, all of our different leaves need to be documented. And we just wanted to raise that issue up for you in terms of what we're really asking people to submit to HR and whether some of that we wouldn't want to do. Obviously, that's your call, but we wanted to raise the issue for you.
In order to prove or note that they've suffered a loss of pregnancy.
Right.
What documents do they submit now for, what is it, what is the loss of pregnancy now that we have, not miscarriage, the
Stillbirth.
stillbirth, do they submit
Yeah, and
anything
first of all,
now?
that's a defined term in our policy. And again, I don't want anything that I say to be misinterpreted that we want to stick where we're at. That's not what we're saying.
I don't.
Thank you.
Just curious how the policy works.
The policy right now defines a stillbirth as a loss at over 20 weeks of gestation. And certainly we acknowledge that there's much loss that goes on before 20 weeks of gestation. There would not necessarily be medical documentation of that. And again, we can find ways to work with you to make sure that that's workable. But certainly people who choose to terminate may or may not want to submit documentation to that effect to their HR office. And people who have an involuntary loss may or may not have any medical documentation of that. And so on our end, we'll continue to work with you to figure out how we can make that workable so that we're not standing in the way of anything and instead moving forward.
So there is a other term in there that, or I'm curious about why the adoption of a new spouse's children is not included in the leave.
Counsel, you're correct. It's not. It's specifically called out as not within the definition. I believe the reason it is when we were doing our best practice research back in March and trying to gather up all the templates we could find from other both public and private employers who were on cutting edges of trying to make sure they were as supportive of their workers as they could be. That was an exclusion that was in a lot of policies, and so we adopted it. Again, happy to have that conversation about whether that's necessary in the city of Boston or not.
Right. I only say because we, one of our former colleagues, and I don't know if any of the colleagues right now is, I think she called herself not a stepmother, but she was a mother something. I can't remember. It was a beautiful term that Ayanna Pressley used to describe herself. And so she very much is a mother and very much may have adopted her daughter. And I don't know if one day I would do the same, but I want to, if that's something that is, hopefully it seems antiquated that if I adopt through one means or adopt through another means to bond with my child, I would like to know that I could still get the leave. So I would put that out there as something, unless there's a reason why we wouldn't want to do that.
Certainly, and we're certainly happy to continue to think about that with you and talk about it. So
if we had that term, no, or at least the exception not removed, because it doesn't say, just if adoption means adoption, that's what I'm hoping for, right? And I understand, and if we were to then just use terms like loss of pregnancy, just talk to me procedurally. Would you have in HR manuals definitions of this, or would you keep it, would you want to put the definitions in the actual explanation? I think it's the, you have a summary explanation online, for example.
Councilor members, what we generally do is we have a policy that takes the framework of the ordinance that you pass and gives it more depth and deals with sort of more of a frequently asked questions so that we can give all of our people as much information up front as possible. And then we distribute that as broadly as possible. So we put it on what we call the hub, which is our internal website, and we put it in policy manuals, and we include it in orientations for new employees and things like that.
Excellent. Okay, so just gonna keep going. I think we had, I don't know if, I think Councillor Wu had to leave. Councillor Sabi George?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are really around the definitions in regards to pregnancy loss or loss of pregnancy, however we would phrase it, and making sure that the early stage loss is also covered. I think that sort of that some of the, certainly the emotional implications of pregnancy loss are very real and can be extremely significant, but there are also many, physical sort of reactions and implications and possible complications. So, and that's regardless of weeks of pregnancy. So I think that it is important that we do sort of fine tune what those definitions are as part of this process. And whether that's today or through a working session or something, I think that's very important. And so that's really my commentary on this. I think other than, sort of looking at the weeks, and I think we're, of course, it sounds like we're all on the same page on the weeks piece, that's been resolved, but the definitions is an important piece.
Thank you. I don't know, Tammy, if you had any response. I think it's consistent with what you said before.
Right, and we're happy to do it in whatever way is the most efficient. If the committee would like us to add suggestions to your draft, we're happy to do that, or simply take it back within internal here and try and figure out, was there any particular reason that any of those exceptions were there? And if so, happy to share them. If not, happy to let them go.
Madam Chair, that certainly seems reasonable to me, but obviously as chair of the committee and sort of you do this process on a much more regular basis, you understand the best sort of next steps forward.
Right. I think I would like to hear more of the questions about what's out there, and then maybe we can collectively figure out how we end the sentence or land this plane, if you will, to make sure that the policy is updated in the most collaborative way possible, but the most expedient, as I do know this policy is effective as of May 1st, as is, right? And doesn't include loss and pregnancy. It still includes the exception for, adopting a spouse's children. So, and I would add to that exception, it says following marriage, and where it's 2021, not everybody is married, but they are certainly partnered up or deeply committed to and in love with the children of their partner. And so I just feel bonding is bonding, whether there's a paperwork on that. So I would like to just, some of those things, I know that this is not, sometimes we're just inheriting language, right? Not continuing policy. I understand that, so.
For the record, I'd like to say that I totally agree.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn, then Councillor Mejia. Councillor Flynn, then Councillor Mejia.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. I don't have any questions. It's a very informative discussion. I want to say thank you to Tammy and to Joanne and to my colleagues on the City Council for this important work. Thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Councillor Mejia, Councillor O'Malley.
Yeah, so thank you. I just have a few questions in regards to LGBTQ couples too, right? Just kind of want to be super mindful that not everyone is in traditional, situations here. And so want to make sure that the language is all inclusive of all different types of families. And so just want to name that. And if it's already there, great. And if not, then I think to Councillor Edwards' point in terms of like catching up to the 21st century and the times, let's just be more intentional about how we are expressing ourselves for a more inclusive Boston. And then the other piece is that I'm curious, in my own family household, my mom has had to take on my sister's kids' throughout her life time. And so we have become, through DCF, court involved and having to raise my younger nieces. And so just curious about kind of what that looks like in terms of families who have court involved children, and what that looks like, and just making sure that there's that support as well for that type of family structure.
Counselor, I appreciate that question. We thought that we had incorporated that into the definitions simply in the reference to foster care placement. I understand the distinction. We thought originally about, do we need to add guardianship or anything? But those are legal processes that not everybody, goes and gets an order of guardianship. But instead, in the situation you were just describing, where family members help out other family members, that's what we were intending. So again, maybe we need to be more explicit in the language that we're using, but we're certainly on the same page with you in terms of what we were intending.
Yeah, because I think that foster it doesn't feel as inclusive in terms of all the different types of family structures that we see and we experience. And then I just am curious, and I do believe that this also is for the when we think about the loss is for the whole family, the both parents, right? The grieving process and the time leave is for both. I do believe you named both the father and the mother. And so I just want to be clear that it's for both, and then that we're going to expand the language, that if it's same-sex couples, that there is, that we're using language that feels more inclusive. So I just want to be clear on that. And then I really do appreciate, I just want to say how much the intentionality around making sure that we're not creating additional hardships for folks who have decided to terminate and having to, I do appreciate that intentionality of protecting people's privacy. There is no need for us to ask those type of questions. And so giving people the opportunity to not have to disclose that, I think it is right on point and exactly the type of space that we want to create for people who are already experiencing enough trauma. And then I know this ordinance is specifically around this issue, but I'm just curious about, sometimes when you do experience loss, that it may not surface in the immediate. You might see it like 5 or 6 months after the fact, right? And so is there a time period? Are we thinking about how do we create enough space and time for people to be able to kind of take this time when they're ready? Because, some folks, working is the best form of therapy for them, right? So I know I'm a workaholic, so I throw myself into the work whenever I'm dealing with something, right? And then oh my God, 6 months later, I realized that I lost a loved one and I never mourned them, and I need that time to deal with it. So I'm just curious what language, if any, can we include to, or if there already it does exist, to include some sort of time frame in terms of at what point can we take that time when we need it?
Council, I appreciate that question. The way our policy is drafted is it's within a 12-month period from whatever the event is, because we certainly realize not everybody processes in the same way or in the same time frame. And not unlike what you were describing for yourself, sometimes people think the best thing is to get back to work, and then they realize maybe it's not. And, everybody's different, everyone's unique. And so we gave it a 12-month period from whatever the triggering event is, in hopes of covering the majority of whatever that was going to be. Again, and somebody could say, well, why not we just have it forever? We need to administer a policy too, so it has to have some sort of guardrails so that we can explain to our people it's this and not that. So
yeah, so that's great. So I'm just, Councilor Edwards, could I just ask one more follow-up question? Yeah. Okay. So to that point, is it possible for then to apply for it within the 12-month grace period and then reserve it to when you need it? Because I don't know if that's complicated or if that's asking too much. I don't know, but I just know that everyone grieves differently. And I don't know, maybe that's too much. I don't know. Just
Councilor,
For my clarification, Councilor Mejia, you mean if I'm thinking the scenario, I lose a pregnancy, I say, hold on, I've lost a pregnancy, but I don't know when I'm going to take the leave. Is that what you're saying?
and that's why I love working with you, because you always understand what I'm trying to say. Yes.
Okay.
Official translator right here. Yes.
You don't want the notification to trigger the leave. You want someone to be able to say, I'm suffering, and be honest about that. And then once, whatever grieving period, whatever moment they're in, to be able to say, I'm gonna leave effective such and such time. Is that what you mean?
Yes, and
Okay.
I appreciate you. Yes. And, I don't know if that's too much, Tammy, to ask for, but the only reason why I'm bringing it up is just because I just know that everybody has a different journey.
Yeah.
And if we can allow for some flexibility for people to be able to take the time when they know they need that moment of like, oh my God, I have lost, or whatever the case is, I just think that flexibility gives people. It's just because you just never know.
Madam Chair and Councilor, I certainly understand the question that you're asking. Madam Chair, I appreciate the clarification. The best I can say is I'm going to think that through with you, and we'll kind of figure it out as we move forward. There isn't anything in the policy that we have in place right now that really addresses that, but I do understand what you're talking about, and so I can certainly give you my word that we will have further conversations with however we're directed to do that when you get to that point.
And yeah, then when we get ready for the rollout, we'll talk about what the rollout looks like in terms of how we communicate this to everyone and all that sort of stuff. That's for a different working session, but just put a pin on that and let it go.
Thanks.
Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tammy, just to Councilor Mejia's question about inclusive language, I'd assume that we'd be saying birth parent and non-birth parent. That seems to be sort of the standard fare.
That's Madam Chair and
what?
members.
Councilor O'Malley, what was the term?
Birth parent and non-birth parent. As it relates to a child that's separate from with an adopted child, or even it could be, but it's basically that seems to, it's my understanding that's rather than saying father and mother, it's birth parent and non-birth parent.
Counselor, and first of all, let me apologize if I'm getting the protocol wrong here. I am used to addressing the chair and then the members.
Oh, no.
So, okay.
You're doing great.
So, Counselor, I agree with you that is language that's, first of all, should be used. It's not in our policy, but it's also only one box, because birth parent, non-birth parent doesn't reflect adoption, foster care placement. And so again, everybody I think is on the same page that we want to be as inclusive as possible. So we probably will need a broad definition section of what parent means. And it means all those things.
Yeah, great. And I think we're all on the same page. We want to make sure that we are inclusive in the language. That's vital. And Tammy, I got on late. I apologize. I don't have a printout. Did you say that this only in the administration's plan, the medical leave for a pregnancy that ends is only available if it happens post 20 weeks?
The way that the policy is drafted right now is it covers stillbirth, which we define to be a loss at 20 or more weeks gestation. The reason we did that, and again, I'm just explaining, I'm not defending. The reason we did that was we were concerned about a pregnancy loss after, say, someone's taken a home test, has confirmed their pregnancy to themselves, but there's no medical records anywhere, and then there's a loss. And there's also no reason that one would necessarily go, so there wouldn't be medical records generated. So when we were drafting, we were trying to figure out, well, how is this going to fit into the documentation requirements that we have historically had? Again, we're happy to continue to work with the council and figure out how do we build in flexibilities in certain situations where that may not be required. But that was the reason that we picked a cutoff date.
Yeah, I appreciate that. From my vantage point, that needs to be removed. I mean, 20 weeks is well into the second trimester. In terms of medical documentation, an earlier miscarriage or termination could, be induced, could be an actual medical procedure, a DNC, a medication. So for what it's worth, I think there should be no minimum. And even in terms of the medical documentation, we don't need it. I have no worry that people are going to use this as an excuse to get a day off of work. So as long as I'm council president, the protocol for the council staff is there's no documentation needed. And I think that's what we should fine tune before we vote on this, Madam Chair.
Councilor O'Malley, I certainly understand you and don't disagree at all. I do want to raise for the council's consideration, though, there are other components of leave that we grant, right? So, people can take sick leave, they can take bereavement leave, they can take different kinds of leave as well. So as we continue this conversation, we'll try and show you some building blocks about how those things interact or don't in these situations.
But do we require documentation for bereavement leave?
For bereavement leave? I'm looking to Joanne Wisniewski.
We do have a definition, Counselor, we do have a definition for bereavement leave. Yes.
Yeah, no, I've read it, and it's spouse, it's child, it's in-laws, or at least in the rules we've seen. But I guess do we?
Require a death certificate?
Yeah, that seems needlessly cruel if we do.
Do you?
No.
Okay.
So I mean, I guess I would just say that there's, an employee who says, I have a slip disc and my doctor said I'm going to need to be out for 2 weeks. I could understand wanting to have some documentation for that. But when we get into something like this, I think we should just believe the employee. I certainly understand that there are certain, union contracts may negotiate some time off and bereavement and other things. But I just think with this, it's just better to err on the side of believing an employee and make it sort of as simple as possible. So that's certainly my request as we continue.
I appreciate that. And now that you've raised the issue of our union contracts, I would put out for the council's consideration as well that after we announced this policy back in late March, maybe it was April, not sure, about half of our unions have joined in and asked for this as to apply to their members, and about 50% have not.
Well, I hope we get to a place where it applies to everyone and isn't negotiated as a union. Yeah. So, no, I appreciate your work. Thank you, Tammy and Joanne, and thank you, of course, to my colleagues. So that's all for now.
Very quickly, just wanted to note again on Councilor Mejia's point of inclusion language. Just the first sentence actually of the leave policy as it reads, I don't know if anyone has it, but it says the city of Boston shall implement paid parental leave for all of its exempt female and male employees. Would it make sense to just simply say employees? So, and I think we're all on the same page. This is not what you did wrong. This is let's clean up. We're noticing things where we can just dispense with the binary language. And I'm sure that we could do that. I also wanted to make sure that I addressed a concern expressed to me. The point of having loss of pregnancy as a leave policy. This is for folks who are pro-choice and we're concerned about a stigma being put on termination, or a sense that it is unhealthy or causes pain or causes immense amount of emotional turmoil. That is not the goal of this in any way to provide additional stigma or something about the termination of a pregnancy in any way, shape, or form. I firmly believe what Councilor O'Malley said, what Councilor Mejia said, what the Councilor Wu and Councilor Sabi George is that employees know what they need and they will express what they need. And we just want to make sure that we have the most compassionate laws to allow for people to say, I need this or I don't. If a person terminates a pregnancy and they do not need this leave, I don't believe they're going to go and write this to you or abuse this policy. I believe they're going to move on with their lives, which is what they're entitled to do in any way, shape, or form. And if they at some point, as Councilor Mejia noted, need to take this leave, they are able to do so within a year. This is meant to just assume people have private lives, and the aspects of entering or exiting parenthood is impactful. That's the whole goal. So I wanted to address this to those who may be watching and being concerned about a stigma. Councilor Mayhew, you have your hand raised.
Yes. Tammy, I do have one more question. And not to get too much in the weeds of the situation, but I was a late term mother. I guess they call me a geriatric mom because I had my child at a late age. And so I just want to make sure that as we're thinking about this and when people apply, that we're really super mindful that childbearing age these days is different, right?
Sure.
So that we're not following these traditional kind of like, oh, women in their 30s, like people are having babies right into their 50s, okay? And so it's just really important for us to be super mindful of that. I mean, not that you need to write this into the law, but I just want us to be super mindful that if we do have an employee who is of a later age, that there's no assumptions being made about, I just needed to name that just because that was my own personal experience being a late age geriatric mom, which is actually the worst term that they can ever think of, which is what I was called. I just want you to know that is such a bad term, and I don't ever want to ever see it anywhere. But just to be super mindful that we are not, also imposing values and prejudices against people based on age, in case people do submit, that we don't question them based on their age situation.
Council, I appreciate that. And on behalf of HR, I want to say that would not only be the wrong thing to do, it'd be illegal because it would be age discrimination. And we'd never do that.
I know that, but I'd be a bad counselor if I didn't name it. And if I was thinking about it and I didn't speak it, so I just felt the need to say it. So thank you for indulging me in that.
Appreciate it.
And I do appreciate Councilor Mejia, whether sometimes people do need to hear that themselves be in the conversation. Even if we do provide the protection for LGBTQ individuals, they need to know they're, as you say, here at the table in our hearts and minds. So for those again watching, this is not to say that we don't protect and don't include. It's to say we see you, we hear you, and you are here in our policy thoughts and minds. So again, just wanted to clarify. Folks are like, well, why are they talking about it? I'm assuming it's because we should be. So I had a couple. I made a list of some of the things for updating that I'd like to do, and then if there's no other questions, I'd like to talk about the procedure we can go into and how the updates become real. Okay. So removing all gendered language, male, female, that's one suggestion. I think we're all okay with that, and just having parent or employees. I don't think marriage should be a requirement of well, anything, but especially it should just be either partner, couples. That's really it. I think also the overall exception for adopting someone else's children that you're married to or partnered with. If adoption is a triggering event, adoption should be a triggering event. And of course, then including loss of pregnancy throughout as one of the other triggering events, and no longer sticking to the stillbirth, but just 20 weeks, and just removing that language and using loss of pregnancy. So that's my running list. I don't know, colleagues, if you had anything more. Okay. So moving into them procedurally, how does this work? Well, there's certain parts that would automatically include what we would put in the ordinance, like loss of pregnancy, right? We would put that in the ordinance. And I think you have moved to 12 weeks already in the ordinance.
Right.
Okay. So that I think those are the only two that we would actually put in the ordinance to change, besides getting rid of the gendered language in the ordinance, removing stillbirth. In terms of the definition and how people access it, kind of the meat on the bones, which would be in the document that you said is on Hub, the paid parental leave policy. I'll hold this up for folks. Mm-hmm. we could, I would assume then that's where we would remove the exceptions to the rule. If we're going to agree to that, we would be able to also, remove the word stillbirth and just loss of pregnancy. And then if it makes sense, describe loosely loss of pregnancy, this is how we define it, or not. I see 3, but this is, termination, stillbirth, or miscarriage. And you yourself as an employee, or if you're the partner of one, if we believe in parental leave, and so on and so forth. Those are the thoughts that I would procedurally. The ordinance gets its kind of back and forth, and then the document gets its back and forth, and together the council and the administration, I think, put our seal of approval on, saying we've got ourselves a 21st century modern inclusive parental leave policy, and we did it together. That's what I think would work.
Madam Chair, we're happy to both do a track changes version of the ordinance for your consideration and of the policy language, whatever is most helpful to the council or to the committee.
That is perfect. That is perfect. And if you with the suggestions we have so far, or again, with whatever best practices you learn, and you could submit it to myself as a chair, government ops, and we can either have a working session where the council, you review it for us as a council where the edits went in. And then assuming that we're fine with those edits, we would just go ahead and move to pass it, the updates in the following week or whenever the next time we pass ordinances.
Happy to.
Okay. Wonderful. So I'm counselors, I'm going to turn it back over to you for any concluding remarks. And of course the administration as well. Tammy, if Tammy or Joanne, if either of you would like to say anything in conclusion, and then we will close out the hearing. So I think in order of arrival, Councillor Flynn and Councillor Mejia. I think Councillor O'Malley had to step off. And then either Tammy or Joanne can also have some concluding remarks. So Councillor Flynn, if you have any concluding remarks.
Hey, Councillor Edwards. No, I don't have any further comments. Glad to support this proposed change. And the feedback from my colleagues on the city council was very helpful, was excellent, as was the responses from both Tammy and Joanne. So thank you, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Councillor Mejia.
Yes. No, I don't have any more questions. I'm just glad that we are here at this point. Every time I participate in these sessions, I always learn something new about the different departments that we have and how we all function here. And so I'm glad that you, Tammy, and your team, Joanne, you are open and receptive to the importance of the inclusivity of how we are talking about this work. So thank you for your leadership in the space, and thank you to my colleagues for raising this up. And I look forward to not only supporting this, but utilizing our platform to kind of help engage people in this very important conversation and dialogue moving forward once it gets rolled out. So thank you.
Thank you. Joanne and Tammy.
So Tammy and I both want to thank you for having us here today and reviewing this very important topic. And we look forward to going through, making changes, and having the next working session with all of the councils.
Thank you very much. With that, I'm going to conclude today's hearing. We will have a working session. HR is committed to get us an updated red line draft with our suggestions and any other best practices. And then we hope to pass that updated draft. And it's exciting to know how many unions already signed on to it. It's a little sad that some have not, but we look forward to all of this still stepping further into the light of social justice. So thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.